Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's event. In 45 minutes, we will learn why customer intelligence and data is the secret weapon that all retailers need to know this year. Today's webinar features a stellar lineup from RUBIX, Talent, and KG Electronic. I'm Ali Thiem, the editor of Power Retail, and it's lovely to have everyone here today for our virtual lunch. But before we start, be sure to check your inboxes for a delivery voucher courtesy of RUBIX. And if you're having trouble, please make sure that you check your junk folder and all of that as well. So I hope you're all tucking into your lunch right now because we have got a massive info-packed session ahead. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists today, but before I introduce everybody, as always, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to go through first. We want this to be a very interactive session today, and we encourage you to ask questions as our speakers go throughout the session. So be sure to pop your questions into the questions tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and we will do our best to answer them if we have time at the end of this session. So today, I am joined by three leading experts in the data fields who will share their experiences and insights on the topics today, and I'm honoured to introduce you to them right now. So first up, we have Arul Arugianotan, the Engineering Head of Architecture at Flybuys, Nimrod Gannon, the Director and CTO of KG Electronic, and Oliver Fontana, the Client Director at RUBIX. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Ali.
Pleasure to be here.
It's very exciting. But with many Australian retailers celebrating fantastic financial results, largely driven by the pandemic, today we wanted to shine a light on one of the most important topics in our industry, data. And how can you make it your secret weapon for success? So let's jump right in. To start off, I am going to actually put a poll out to the audience. So let's begin. How well do you know your customer from a data perspective? I'm going to give everybody about 30 seconds to put their answers in. Okay, 1 second. There we go. Yes, so how well do you know your customer from an actual data perspective? So please select one of the following. And I think we should wait another 15 seconds and then we can go through the answers. All right, we have 50% of our audience that's actually put in an answer. So make sure you put your answer in and we can go through everything. Okay, and 3, 2, 1. Okay, and that's closed now. So let's go through the answers. We've had 12% say that they know that their customers like a best mate. They have 59% saying that they know their customers as if I'd text them but never call, and 29% say that if I was standing next to them, I would have, I think, is it no idea? Let's share these results. I think it's brilliant. There we go. So we've had the majority saying I would text them but never call. So you guys, what do you think of these answers?
Well, it's interesting to see that there's still 30% who would know their customers in a way, because your customer is what drives your income, and it's very important to know your customer. And it doesn't have to dive into the full length of it. You just need to know something, what they like, where to buy, what time, or something small. Just start something small. So the fact that there's still 30% who don't know their customers at all, that's a problem. It's something that you just start learning slowly, because the rest obviously do know their customers in a certain way.
Absolutely. And Oliver and Arul, do you have anything to add to that? Do these results surprise you at all?
No, I mean, I was just going to say this doesn't surprise to me, because even today, in this digital era and data revolutionary era, people have different perspective of what the customer means to them. And some people think just knowing the name, gender, and email is good enough, and that's what they need to know about the customer. You know, it goes beyond that. I mean, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think these results are very surprising, but at the same time, I would hazard a guess that a lot of the respondents here do actually know their customers from a data perspective a little better than they actually think they do. Data isn't just numbers and categories in a spreadsheet. It's also how well you understand that data from a business perspective. And while you may not be familiar with the data at a low level, you may understand a lot of the concepts and theory behind your customers at a very high level, even just intuitively from having worked with them for so long. You might know that a lot of your customers are young people, for example, without actually having looked at that in a spreadsheet before.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to start actually with now Gannon and Arul on the topic of knowing your customer. What does it actually mean to you and why is it important? Let's start with Gannon.
All right, because we are a marketplace seller, we don't really own the customer, but it does not mean that we can't use the data that we have from the customer's details, where he lives, where he buys, what he buys, and often that he buys. It should give us enough information of maybe not how to drive more sales to that customer, because like I said, I don't own it, so I can't do any EDMs, but I do know what to buy to which marketplace, because I know each marketplace what kind of products those customers like to purchase for example. I do know what to do promotions to different marketplaces, because again, I know the time frame, I know all the stuff that they like and what, so you learn from the customer on the habits that they do for buying for my type of business of how to order stock. This is something that we use the data as marketplace sellers versus other website sellers obviously use a lot more data of how to promote more sales, etc., that we obviously can't do.
Very interesting. And Arul, why?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the survey results. It clearly says that, you know, everybody has a different definition of knowing their customers, and we own about 11.6 million customer data, and it completely means different to us. I mean, for us, knowing the customer is not just knowing their name, gender, or email. It goes beyond that. For us, it is like having a vivid picture of the customer. And you may ask, what do you mean by that? It's going beyond their personal attributes like name, gender, and email, and knowing who they are holistically, what their expectations are, what their needs are, what their beliefs are, and not only what they think about us, but even what they think about our competitors as well. This 360-degree spectrum of customer knowing about them is very important for us, and we spend a lot of time and energy and budget in actually doing the customer research. We collect various data from our partners, we collect various data from our third parties, and we create this so-called a golden record or 360-degree spectrum of customer. And this is important for us, as in like it enables us to create various personas, which allows us to understand who are the passengers in the journey, or who are the challengers in the journey, or who are the administrators of the journey itself. And based on that, we create the segments, hyper segments, and we heavily take these insights as a strategic input into our customer engagement and campaign strategy. So I guess in today's world, just knowing a few attributes about them is not good enough. It needs to go beyond that. So that's what knowing about customer means for Flybuys.
Fantastic. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Arul, as well. How can quality data support the customer journey, and what makes them return time and time again?
Very valid question. I mean, we talked about knowing customer and collecting various attributes and all. Again, when it comes to data quality, people's definitions are quite constrained. People think data quality as just one attribute. Having a right email address is probably what they think, or a valid email address is probably the right thing. But what if that email address, which could be valid one, but that's not something which a customer is using, So I guess it goes back to understanding comprehensively what that data quality means, and it has multiple dimensions, and various industries have various definitions, various organizations use various dimensions, but I guess in a nutshell, I would say data quality is pretty much the completeness of the data, as in like not having one or two attribute about the customer or any particular entity, but having an end-to-end completeness of that attribute. And then probably the second thing is consistency. If you are using your system of record, you're using your system of innovation, how does the data is consistent between those two? Is your channels collecting a different data as compared to your analytics system collecting different data, so we need to have a consistency across that. Then accuracy comes into picture, the integrity of the data comes into picture. But I think the another important aspect is probably the timeliness of the data. This is where I was trying to give you an example. What if you had an email address of a customer which is 3 years old and he's moved on to new email address, and you're just sending that your campaigns to that particular old email address? So I guess if you combine all that, the data quality is quite a comprehensive aspect of it. And probably I'll give you one example why this comprehensive dimensions of the data quality is very, very important. I mean, if you look at Flybuys, we execute thousands of campaigns on behalf of our partner ecosystem, and that results in about over 1 billion emails to our members. And it is of paramount importance to us that we ensure that it delivers the world-class engagement. It goes and lands in their top inbox. It gets consistently high open rates, and when they open, the offers that is inside that, they're quite personalized at an individual level, household level, and they're relevant, attractive, and timely. Now, if you look at all these attributes which are important to make a campaign successful and deliver a return on investment to our partners, it is very, very important that all that dimension that I mentioned about data quality are there. So I guess in a nutshell, I would say just don't think data quality as having the valid email address, but consider the other attribute, other dimensions of the data quality as well.
Absolutely. It's just, yeah, the correct email address and name is sort of like the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Yes,
There's so much more to it than that. So Oliver, in terms of making the customer data your secret weapon, what would be 3 essential things that underpin good data governance?
All right, that's a big question. So bear with me while I run through these, but let me know if you want to dive into any of them in a bit more depth. 3 top things. Probably the #1 item at the very, very top of the list here when it comes to governance of data or having any effective data strategy. It comes down to accountability and leadership. Just like all things in a business, if there isn't proper leadership and accountability over that thing, it typically doesn't get done or doesn't get done very well. So when we talk about the leadership perspective, we're mostly referring to the very top level. So who in the business at a leadership level, maybe the executive or senior management level, is actually driving the changes, who's driving the governance strategy, who's driving the outcomes and plans that people are making around the data. That driving force is very important, and the encouragement that other business leaders receive is very much paramount to actually getting those changes over the line and making sure everything's being followed properly. Accountability is the other big part of it. This will tie into the other 2 points I'll get to in a second, but you need people to be specifically accountable for certain parts of your data strategy or governance plan. They need to be business owners of certain domains of your data, for example. Someone needs to be responsible broadly for customer data. Someone needs to be responsible for maybe manufacturing data or whatever is relevant to your business that you actually have from a data perspective. They don't need to be a technical person necessarily. And in fact, I would encourage them to be a business person, but they need to be responsible for that domain of data. And that's because all of the information will need to flow from the lower level for everyone working with the data directly, all the way up to the top level of the executive level as well. That does tie in very well with the next couple of points as well. The second one probably being business understanding. This actually ties back very well with the very first thing that got discussed here. Why is understanding your data or customer so important? Well, it's because if you don't understand something, what are you meant to do with it? This is especially true for data. If you don't have context or an understanding of what your data is, it's meaningless. It's just a bunch of numbers or categories in a spreadsheet or in a table. You can't do anything with it. It's all contextual. You can't work with the categories of your data. So for example, different domains or bits of information around your customers themselves. What does it mean when your customer is a young person versus an old person from a demographic standpoint? What does it mean if they're an affluent household versus a lower or middle income household? Those definitions can change depending on a business as well. The context is critically important. If you don't understand that context and meaning behind your data and what you're actually doing, it becomes very difficult to actually do anything with it, which ties into the aspect of trust. The #1 thing data is meant to be used for is for decision making. There are other things, of course, but that's probably the #1 item. And you can't make decisions properly if you don't understand, if you don't trust the information that you've got at hand. It's kind of like if you've got a person sitting next to you who's meant to be telling you the current situation in your company, but 50% of the time they tell you a lie. How are you going to be able to make decisions based on what they're telling you? It doesn't make any sense. So that aspect of trust with your data is very important, and that comes down to the understanding of it. But also it ties in very well with the third point, which is quality control of your data as well. And Arul brought this up very, very strongly just a second ago. Quality of your data is, again, very, very important. I'm going to go on a slight tangent here for a second and talk about entropy, but bear with me, it will make sense in a moment. So the concept of entropy is all about how certain things tend to become more chaotic over time. And the way this happens is actually slightly unintuitive, though most people do get it just without having thought about it very much before. The whole idea is, how many different ways does something have to be correct? And how many different ways does something have to be incorrect? So if we use a bunch of balls and buckets as an example here, imagine you have 4 different colored balls, maybe a green, red, blue, yellow one, and you've got 4 corresponding colored buckets as well. So green, red, yellow, blue buckets. And you are randomly throwing these balls at the buckets and seeing where they land in those buckets. And you want all of the balls to be in their same correct corresponding bucket. So the idea of entropy is, well, if that's what's happening, you're randomly throwing them in, how many different ways can you get this right? And how many different ways can you get this wrong? Well, there's one way for it to be right. You want the red ball in the red bucket, you want the yellow ball in the yellow bucket, the blue in the blue, and the green in the green. There's exactly one way for this to be correct. But how many different ways can it be incorrect? Without talking through the mathematics, there are 24 different ways for it to be incorrect. You could have the red ball in the blue bucket, you could have the yellow ball in the green bucket. You might have the blue ball in the blue bucket correctly, but then all the other 3 could be wrong. This is the core of entropy. When you've got that many different ways for something to be incorrect versus correct, it just means that's all the more likely for your whole situation to be wrong. And that applies so strongly to the concept of data as well. There's typically only one way for your data to be right, but there are dozens of different ways your data can be wrong. You could have missing rows, as Arul pointed out earlier, is a very common one. You could have rounding errors on your numbers. You could be miscategorizing things. People could be typing things in incorrectly into a computer. You might have timing issues, which is another thing that Arul pointed out earlier. It could just be that something isn't timely enough. You're receiving it late and it's already incorrect by that time. There are so many different ways your data can be wrong, but it can only be right one way, which underpins the whole importance of having proper quality controls. That means reviewing your data for quality. It means having automated checks on top of that. It means making sure that all of your different structures around data transformation and movement between systems are as robust as possible to try and discourage that entropy from taking over the system. It's impossible to make it perfect. No business has perfect data. I've never found one personally, but you want to try and limit that where possible. And this all ties together with those 3 main points. You want people accountable for that quality of data. You want all those access and quality controls on top of the data itself. And of course, you want to understand that data to enough depth that you know when it's going to be wrong or not as well. Sorry, I talked for a very long time there, but let me know if you want to go into more depth on any of those.
Oh no, that was fantastic. I think maybe later on in the webinar, we could actually go into it more because yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I do want to spread the chat around a little bit, but I loved it. Really, really great. So let's just throw it out to the entire group. I'd love to know what you actually learned from your decisions and your mistakes. So I'm going to start with Gannon.
Ooh, mistakes, my favorite topic. Mistakes are the most crucial part of a business success. And if you don't make mistakes, you don't learn from them, you can't grow. And I think the mistakes teaching you that there's always a better way. Going back to what you just said, Oliver, there's always a better way to get it right. There's always a better way to get closer to that complete and accurate data, if you can call it. The difference for us for data versus a lot of things that my colleagues are saying is that for us, the data starts from creating the product. Because you will never get your customer details if you won't buy from you. So for data point of view, you have to start from creating the product without any mistakes and put as much data as you can there. So then eventually that customer will purchase from you, which means he's willingly giving you his data, which then you can use it for other things. So the more mistakes and the more, like you said, governance, the more people are looking at this data and finding those mistakes, which means they're now creating processes to make it better and accurately, then that's how you grow and you get better. And the decisions you do is you don't have to worry about doing mistakes. You need to be proud that you found a mistake and then you fixed it. Just don't make it twice. that's what we've learned, that without mistakes, we can't go forward at the end of the day. And how to avoid mistakes, it's just to completely check, test, and push the system. Don't just assume that because you've done it and you think it's right, that's it, we move on to the next stage.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Arul, what about you?
Yeah, probably I'll park the mistake side. I won't talk about that, but probably I would like to share some of the learnings that I've had, not within Flybuys, but also in my last 10 years dealing with data. Probably, I guess, one of the major challenges that any organization suffers when we are talking about data related initiatives and making data to generate a revenue or add a value to the business, we suffer from sponsorship, the executive sponsorship. Funding alone is not good enough to make those projects successful. So I guess executive sponsorship, and I do call this as a bimodal approach. We need executives who sponsor and support this initiative strategically, and secondly, we need the champions who live and breathe the implementation of these initiatives. And second learning is pretty much what we should do is we should not go big bang, and as in like we can't go and address the entire problem that every in the organization every business unit has. Based on your maturity curve within an organization, probably you should start small. Probably you should find out where there are low hanging fruits, or where there is a project or opportunity where you can actually go and deliver a quick impact and prove the value of the data. Probably start with your marketing, or start with your finance, or take a small use case within a business unit, run that successfully, and take small steps at a time. Probably those are the two learnings that I would like to share. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Oliver, over to you.
Not retread the ground that Arul and Nimrod have just talked through. From a slightly different perspective, mistakes aren't always things you do by accident. They can also be very intentional as well. So the whole concept of, for example, a trial and error approach to something is that you're intentionally making mistakes to try and understand a situation better. This is very relevant to both Arul and Gan here from a marketing data perspective. When you're trying to understand what the biggest impact you can have is for a given client or individual when it comes to marketing activities, that information doesn't come from nowhere. You have to have tried things before. Do you know if a billboard works properly? Do you know if what kind of web advertisements work most effectively? Are emails very good versus text messages? Do you want a YouTube ad? There are a lot of different ways you can market to individuals, and there are a lot of different types of suggestions you can make to them about what products they could have or what offers you can provide them. In order to understand that better, the typically best way to do it is to go through a trial and error approach. You try a few different things for a small subset of people each time, kind of scientifically, and try to get an understanding of, okay, well, this group reacted this way to this thing, this group acted this way to this thing. What can we learn from that? You're not going to get it right the first time, but the whole point is you're making these mistakes on purpose to try and understand it better. You can apply those same learnings to mistakes you weren't intending to make as well. So if you've accidentally marketed to the wrong group of people, well, can you at least learn something from that? Have you learned something interesting from a straight up data perspective, or have you learned something about how you can reduce the odds of you making a mistake like that again? There are always things you can learn from these situations, and a lot of it is just initially understanding and recognizing that you cannot avoid making mistakes. So there's no point beating yourself up about it, unless it's a really big one. I can understand if you want to beat yourself up after that.
Love it, love it. So let's just jump back in with another audience poll. So, do you have a dedicated customer intelligence strategy? I am going to, again, give it around 30 to 40 seconds. So make sure you put your answer in. Don't worry, it is all anonymous as well. So we don't know who said what, but it'll be great to get everyone's insights here. All right, we've got some very interesting answers coming in at the moment, so I'll be excited to discuss these. We've got about 60% of the people voting, so make sure everyone put your answer in, and we'll wait another 10 seconds. Okay, and closed. Let's have a look at the results, shall we? There we go. So 50% of people say that they do not have a dedicated customer intelligence strategy. 25% say sort of. 15 say yes, but we don't know how to follow or implement it. And 10% said yes, we're all over it. So guys, do you find these results surprising? Do you find them not surprising? Have at it.
Not surprising at all. It's this is a very common issue in a lot of businesses. It's not having proper strategies around things like customer intelligence. It applies to a lot of different types of information, and a lot of this is very data driven, but customer intelligence is a very common one. The typical reason why it's often a no or a sort of, which is 75% of what we've got here, is because it looks very complicated from an outside perspective. You look at the idea of setting up a customer intelligence strategy, you think, where do you even begin trying to tackle that? Who do you talk to? Who needs to be running it? What kind of information do you need to come up with this strategy? And then what should that strategy even be? If you haven't done it before, it can look very daunting. Like with most things, this typically just comes down to getting started. It's very difficult to, for example, begin writing an essay right at the start. You might spend an hour looking at a blank page and not actually have done anything yet. But once you get those first sentences or two down and you come up with, okay, where am I going to start with this? What am I going to start talking about? Suddenly it becomes easier and easier to start writing the rest of the essay. And it's the same thing with an intelligence strategy or really any plan. You want to start something, sit down, have a brainstorm with a group of people, try to figure out what are the components of a data or customer intelligence strategy. What are we trying to get out of it? And is there a way we can connect the two dots between those things versus what do we want versus what are the ways we can actually accomplish this, or where can we start with it? Oftentimes just getting started is the only thing you need to do for the floodgates to open and everyone to suddenly start throwing their hat into the ring of what you need to do. So while this isn't very surprising, I think a lot of it is a confidence issue in a lot of businesses, that they don't have the ability or time to actually work on something like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%, and it's a good thing. This result is a great thing if you think about it, because it means that you guys are doing well without it. So now it's a brilliant time to start, and then you're just going to do even better. So for the 50%, you got nothing to lose but just gaining, because you're already doing well. You have some sort of a success, and then you're going to go and you're going to start small. Don't have to do big. You know, Excel sheets and data and massive data files are very, very scary and very hard to understand. Where do I start? So just start small. Start with something basic, but like Oliver said, start, because you'll find and you'll get into a certain world that it will amaze you, because it will start telling you things that you never thought you knew, or it will tell you the truth about things that you weren't sure that you were doing. So it will tell you what you do right and what you do wrong, which is a good thing to know.
Definitely.
100%, Gannon, that is an excellent point. There's so much low-hanging fruit if you haven't done this kind of thing before. As Gannon was just pointing out, if you've not looked at a proper intelligence strategy before in any area, whether it's customer or otherwise, if you've not done it before, often there are some really obvious things that will bubble to the surface right at the start, giving you a pretty great return on investment there.
Mm-hmm.
And Arul, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, see, those results, especially for those 50% of the people who have not done anything or not started anything, I guess don't wait for a big funding approval. Don't wait for executives to support or sponsor. Try pick up a small use case which you can actually handle within your existing workforce, and try and prove the value back, and the sponsorship and the funding would automatically come. I mean, if you just write waste the energy and time writing the business case and wait for another 6 months to get it approved, that's not going to happen. I mean, again, as I said, just talk to your stakeholders, business leaders, and pick one department. There could be one, and even before you go there, I can give you a small example. Just go and talk to your marketing division and see what kind of campaigns they're doing and what kind of returns they're getting on that, and then just go back and tell them that probably you're targeting, probably I'm just making up number here, 3.6 million members you're targeting, and out of those, probably half of them don't even have valid email address. Yeah, or after the emails were sent, half of them did not bother to open the email. So when you provide this kind of insights, that allows business to say, oh, I need to go and do something about the data that I have, or I need to go and actually invest more about the data, what that data can tell me about it. So try and do small things to gain the trust and the faith from business, and that's how you can begin the journey. I mean, don't wait for executive leadership team or management to change and someone comes and start talking about data. You will be sitting there in that number still. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, also to our audience, be sure that you put any questions into the questions tab just so that we can have them at the end of the session. But before we wrap up, I would like to ask each of our panelists about one key piece of advice or a takeaway that they would like to share with the audience. So let's start with Arul.
I guess for me, I would say data is everybody's business. As I said, you can't wait for technology to do it for you, or technology team can't wait for business to do it. If you really want to be a data-driven organization, then there is a need of partnership between business and data, and don't wait for business to come to you, or if there are business folks in the audience, don't wait for technology to come to you. You need to establish that partnership and kick off this journey. That's probably, I would say, as my 2 cents on this. Yeah.
Fantastic. And what about you, Gannon?
For us, I would recommend start from your product creation or where you start your journey. When you start your journey, that's where your data should be already pre-filled, and put as much as work as you can on that. Don't be lazy. It sometimes takes longer, but the longer you do that at the start, the less you have to do at the end. And this is the most important part. So when you create your products or your data or your website or anything, put as much data and thought from the start, and that will allow you to become better and smarter at the end, because you get a lot of information out there which you'll get received back as well as an end result.
Love it. And Oliver?
Mostly agreeing with Arul and Gannon there as usual. I think one of the key, all right, to not rehash the ground they've gone over, I reckon communication lines is what I would suggest in this case. Open up your communication lines, get talking about this kind of thing. If you're at a general management level of some kind, talk to your people and business leaders about data. If you've got ideas, share them. If you've got people in your team that are interested in data or customer intelligence strategies or whatever it may be, encourage them to speak about it. And if you are at a higher executive kind of level in particular, definitely encourage the rest of your business to be more open and have more discussions about their ideas. What you'll find is a lot of the time the ideas that come up in a business are underpinned by data of some kind. And simply by having those discussions, you'll suddenly realize that there are a lot of different things you could be tackling at any one time, and that quite a few of them might very well have very high returns on investment as well. Some of you in the audience will probably have heard of a lot of very interesting types of data activities that have been done in other businesses, things like fancy machine learning, things like really complicated and interesting predictive analytics, things like video cameras, identifying defects in products, all sorts of weird and wonderful, wacky things you can do with data. And one of the questions that probably pops up into your head, well, what can I do? How am I going to leverage this in my business? How come we don't do anything like that already? And oftentimes the answer is there isn't enough communication and free discussion going on around these things. And the way that these types of projects typically get started in the first place is because someone was chatting about it with their coworker over a coffee. Might have just been sitting down and someone said, hey, I reckon we've got all this data lying around over here. Do you reckon we could try and do some predictive analytics on this to try and see if we can target our customers more effectively or something like that? And they go, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting. Let's talk about that again. So you set up another meeting and you go, oh, actually, yeah, it really looks like this is something we can do. We've just spoken to more business stakeholders about it. There seems to be a lot of buy-in on this. That's how it always starts. No one walks in and just says, hey, I've got this brilliant idea for a data thing we can do. Here's a 20-page business suggestion document, and if you just sign here at the bottom, we'll get started. As Arul pointed out earlier, that's not typically how it happens. It's all just discussion oriented. So my suggestion would always be to open up those communication lines and just be open to discussing these things.
Fantastic. Love it. Well, 3 amazing pieces of advice. I couldn't ask for any better. So we do have a couple of questions from the audience, starting with Adam. Can we use data analytics to make sure that we have a clean IT ecosystem? Whoever would like to answer that one, jump right in.
If an clean IT ecosystem, it's a very big and wide thing. In a nutshell, yes, you can, but then you need to map your data to analytics very, very well to get that result you want to achieve. because to get the clean IT ecosystem, the mapping that you're going to have to do to all the data that you get at the start to give you a picture is a big work, and it goes back again to preparation to get the right data, to map it properly, so then eventually when it's all going in, you get to start having a picture, and then that picture will make sense for you to read. So yes, you can, but there'll be a lot of work and preparation to do that. It's not a simple thing, not a simple thing at all.
I agree with Gannon on that. You go, Arul.
Yeah, if I understand the question correctly, I guess the way I'm interpreting is the question is, can we use the data and analytics itself to pretty much get the insights into the tools and the technologies that deliver that data in the first place, the health check of that? Then obviously the answer is yes. I mean, we talked about several attributes that we collect about members and everything. I mean, you can look at, I mean, let's take an example of data quality. I mean, if you do a profiling on a particular data, and that profiling gives you a percentile or a health rate of how good the data is, then it's pretty much talking about the processes and the platforms that are in place in terms of collecting that data in a good quality. You know, then you can go back and actually take a preventive measures in terms of where those changes needs to be done in terms of your platforms. You know, if you're using certain automative measures to make sure your data is governed and cleaned properly, and your profiling gives you different result, then it tells you that whatever systems you have in place, it's not working. You know, so I guess yes, the answer is yes. You just, as I said again, you just need to compartmentalize this and go one step at a time. I mean, if you look at again whole enterprise and say, I'm going to do the health check of end to end and look at one report, that's not going to work. You need to break down into the data lifecycle as well, the different channels from where you're collecting the data. You know, I mean, like if you take an example, whether if you're doing a door knocking, I mean, again, I'm talking industry wide. If you're collecting the data by door knocking, what is the data entry system that how they collect the data, versus if someone calls on the call center, what are the different systems that they collect the data? Is there a consistency between them? You know, so I guess yes, by all means, you can actually look at your results and then go back and target those particular systems.
Brilliant. And Oliver, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, from an implementation perspective, Gannon mentioned before that there are tools out there that will allow you to do this, and it takes a bit of effort. He's absolutely correct. And often the best place to start is just look at what you've already got. There are quite a lot of tools out there that actually provide a fair amount of diagnostic information about what's going on, and oftentimes it's simply not leveraged properly. There are a lot of tools that do this exceptionally well compared to others, and usually it's the workflow tools that do this. So by workflow, I mean any tool that coordinates the IT activities that are going on. Good examples of tools like this would be Talend, to be a bit topical, very good as a workflow tool for managing ETL processes or data transfer processes. But you know, on AWS, for example, there's a tool called Airflow, which manages a lot of IT activities as well. These tools coordinate resources and manage the flow of work that actually goes on from an IT perspective. But when they do this, they produce their own version of logs and documentation that can be then looked at in reports or fed into other systems so that they can be managed and understood more effectively. So really, it's about investing a bit of that time to go and leverage those tools you've already got and just pull that information out, get it presentable so you can actually start paying attention to it at that point.
Wonderful. We have a question from Dylan. I find this a very interesting question. Do you see a future where customer data is anonymous, and how would this affect your business?
Ooh. Look,
let's jump on Oliver. You have a little finger raised there.
I'll just point out that actually a lot of the time customer data is already anonymous. It's typically meant to be in a lot of businesses, though often many businesses don't actually effectively govern their data this way. But when we talk about anonymizing data, it doesn't mean not having the data. It means it's anonymous, or it can't be tied back to an individual. And typically, whatever you're doing doesn't actually require you to know specifically who the person is. If you're marketing to a large group of people, say 1,000 people, and you've got all their data in your system, you don't need to know all their names. You don't need to know even necessarily where they live, depending on what you're doing. You don't need to know much about them from a personal individual perspective. What you need to know is their demographic information and just about them as a general idea. So very often in a business that has very strong governance practices, the people who are doing marketing will not actually even have access to individual information that identifies anyone. They might have the email address field, for example, but when you're looking at it in the system, it might just be a bunch of jumbled letters that they've obfuscated, so you can't actually see the email address. And that's fine, as long as the system knows who it needs to be sent to, that's okay. And you can look at the general demographic information. A lot of the time, the information is actually already anonymized, and that's most of what the push is nowadays for. It's about making sure that individual personalization isn't compromised and that no one's getting their data out into the world where it can be used for any nefarious purposes. But I'll pass on to Gannon there because I've been talking too much.
That's all right, mate. You're doing well. No, look, like you said, there's a lot of data out there that can't be anonymous. It's just the general data that you need to continue your process as an e-commerce or as an online business. And you don't need to go and jump out to Facebook and say, look, this guy lives here and this is, you don't need to, but you just need to get the general idea of who are they in general, what they buy in general, and obviously then apply that to your business strategies of what you use this data for. So it's a good thing. I think that the core data will be anonymous, but the general data which is needed for your business, that's where you need to learn. And it's okay, they might make it harder for you to get less data. I mean, Amazon deletes all the orders from your system automatically after 30 days, so you won't have any data. They're protective, extreme about that. But it still doesn't prevent me of knowing that in Amazon I can get X amount of products because I know that the Amazon customer likes it. That doesn't prevent me from that information. Even Amazon can't hide that. But at the same time, I don't go into call those customers and I won't go and email those customers because I don't have that data. But at least I know where to put my products and what, because I've used the general information to my advantage. And this is what you gonna have to do. You're gonna have to adapt to the situation and evolve with the data you have. And as long as you keep doing mistakes, you're gonna learn from them.
Wonderful. And Arul, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents on that is there is a place for both, the personalized data as well as anonymous data. And it goes back to the use cases. I mean, there are use cases where you only deal with anonymized data. You can't personalize the data and try and come up with your strategy. I mean, you need to take a holistic approach. If you're developing a strategy, if you're coming up with your strategy, then I guess mostly it depends on anonymized data. When we talk about anonymized data, what are we talking about? Like when we say knowing your customer, who they are, we are not talking about each individual Tom, Dick, Harry. We are talking about a group of people who share common sentiments, who share common beliefs, common intent, or they are from a particular income group or age group or gender group. So that's what we call segments, personas, or hyper segmentation. So the strategies are based on that. When you are executing that strategy and when it comes to the implementation tasks, that's where probably you need an individual email address. When that email address is targeted, you just know that this email address belongs to someone who belongs to this particular segment or this particular persona. So I guess there is place for both, and there is need for both as well, I would say.
Fantastic. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and that actually concludes our event for today. We have plenty of more questions that have come up in the last few minutes, so I'll make sure that all of our guest speakers today get access to them and they can reach out to you individually. I hope you've all enjoyed hearing about the strategies and sharing experiences on how you can better, how better your organizations can be using customer intelligence to your advantage. So the team from RUBIX will be in touch in the weeks ahead. And we hope that this is the start of a conversation which will help you on your customer intelligence journey. So RUBIX and Talent have additional case studies, insights, and tools that they can share with you as well. On behalf of Power Retail, I would like to thank our 3 guests for being here today. Of course, our fantastic audience for taking the time out to actually being here. I hope everyone enjoys their lunch and have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. See ya.
See you later.
Bye-bye.